Hello, my name is Randy Reid, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Lighting Bureau, as well as the editor and publisher of the Edison Report, which is delighted to co-sponsor the NLB's annual Lighting Forum. We are here at the studios of the forum's other co-sponsor, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, where I am moderating 5 panel discussions. This panel is titled Lighting for Seniors. Our panelists are Robert Soler of BIOS Lighting and Terry McGowan, President and CEO of Lighting Ideas. Gentlemen, welcome. The first question goes to you, Terry. What makes lighting for seniors different than lighting for anyone else?
Well, the main thing is because the eyes of seniors are different than the eyes of everyone else, because as you get older, eyes change. And so seniors is kind of a loose definition. It's just as eyes get older, there are enough changes going on and potentially diseases of the eye, very mind-changing and physical changing diseases, so that you have to really take those into account when you start talking about lighting for seniors. And those changes can be subtle or they can be very significant. And so you have to have a special process not only for the lighting itself, but also for designing that lighting. It isn't a simple thing to do, especially if you're going to optimize vision for seniors. It also is very individual, so that you have to really tune the lighting to the particular problems that the individual has.
Robert, what about circadian stimulus for lighting for seniors?
So circadian rhythms and circadian lighting is really important for seniors, especially, because of the reasons that Terry kind of mentioned before. The aging eye has problems. So what we see is that they're most likely to get circadian desynchrony because they're not getting the right light signals.
Circadian what?
Desynchrony. So they're desynchronized. Their circadian rhythms are not really in sync.
Right.
And so we need to provide brighter days, darker nights. And so what we see when we do circadian lighting in elderly specifically is less daytime napping, less nighttime wandering, even reductions in Alzheimer's progression. There's a lot of benefits associated with it, less sundowning, less emotional outbursts. So the benefits, and this is, could be exclusive for memory care type situations, but also when we think about it, really circadian lighting is really important for everyone. But
what does it mean? What does circadian lighting mean to you specifically?
So circadian lighting is just about trying to replicate what's going on outside in the built environment. When you can't get outside enough, bringing those key wavelengths in that basically stimulate daytime and then remove them when it's nighttime. So bringing in brighter days, darker nights to our physiology.
Terry, what are some of the guidelines for lighting for seniors?
Well, there is more information than ever before because there's more research than ever before on this subject. We know a lot about the aging eye now, and we know a lot about treating it so that we can build better recommendations for lighting. For example, there is a standard, and it is a standard from the Illuminating Engineering Society that treats just the question of lighting for older eyes. So that's a basic resource that has been revised over the years, and it provides a good grounding, especially for lighting designers and manufacturers who want to build equipment or put equipment in the right place of the right type so that the vision of the seniors is maximized.
So with this recommended practice, it's a recommended practice.
Recommended practice.
It's recommending amounts of light?
Amounts of light is critical. Typically, they're double what you would use for a younger person as a recommendation, for example. And one of the recent studies and research has suggested that one of the things that older eyes and older people miss most as they age is the ability to read. And so what we found is that the amount of light that seniors typically use for reading, coming from a table lamp or a floor lamp, is not enough. And so they're hurting themselves. They're slowing down the process because they don't get enough light. And I think Robert's point about circadian rhythms is also very important because so often seniors, whether they live alone or in some kind of a retirement community, they're often in twilight zone, literally. They don't get enough light during the day so that they sleep well at night.
So Robert, when we talk about brighter days and darker nights, and the brighter days part, do we care about color temperature?
We can. So color temperature is one way to do it. So to provide brighter days and darker nights, there's a couple different ways. So you could just, intensity is one way to do it. You could change the color over the course of the day, or you could change just the spectrum, and you could do it in a way that that you're really not compromising color and color preferences. One thing I'm sure Terry will agree on is those cooler color lights are a lot more glary than, you know, warmer colored lights, and these elderly are more susceptible to that glare. So you want to make sure that it's comfortable. It's a comfortable environment. So I think that the best way to do it is either with brighter environment or right spectrum of lights. The other thing that you want to think about when you're thinking about colder color temperatures is that might throw off the entire aesthetic of what you're trying to achieve. Most elderly communities try to bring in the aspects of home and try to have that kind of aesthetic to it. And you combine that with colder white light, it looks a lot more institutional. So you want to make sure that, I think when you pinpoint spectrum, you could kind of get the benefits that you're looking for in a, you know, in a color and meet the aesthetic that you require.
So just a personal story, 2 months ago I put my mom in an assisted living facility, and so I'd been looking for several months, and when I would walk in and I would see 5,000 and 6,000 Kelvin, some of it on 24 hours a day, I just couldn't get past it. I just could not get past it. So we found one with some very good good lighting. Terry, are there now senior living facilities that are doing color tuning on a regular basis?
Yes, there are, and I should really get very technical here for a moment.
Please.
And say, you know, chromaticity is a nice measure, but the history of chromaticity is really in color printing, painting, and color standardization. It does not tell you really the effect on circadian rhythms. It's the spectral content of the light source that does that. The only way you can really analyze this is by looking at the spectral distribution, seeing where the wavelengths are. All blue is not alike, for example, because the sensors in your eyes are more sensitive to some types of wavelengths of blue than they are to others. So we have to invent a vocabulary here. We have to get a metric that really measures this so we know what we're talking about. And the good news is we're close to that. We're close to being able to put numbers on any light source and measure it in the usual way, but we're measuring light that goes into the eyes, remember. We're not measuring it down on the work plane. So we're getting better at the measurements, and we're going to have models that tell us how much light for a certain period of time will work to set the circadian rhythm. But we aren't there yet, and so a lot of this is still kind of guesswork and recommendations. But the general rule of bright days and dark nights is really a good one. And so if you move the person, the older person, out of the sitting room, out of the bedroom, into the bright sunlight, into a patio, or perhaps a greenhouse-like environment with lots of glass and daylight coming in, that's a good thing. And chances are you will be able to make a real difference in the quality of life of that person, including the quality of sleep.
With spectral distribution, will we still talk about warmer and cooler? And throughout the day, you would want these seniors to have, I assume, kind of warm in the morning, like a sunrise, and then cooler throughout the day, and then warmer towards the end of the day? Is that fair?
That's nice, and it might be aesthetic, and it might be very convenient, but there are ways to shorten that. For example, a couple of hours of high-intensity illumination with the proper content, spectral content, can really entrain those circadian rhythms. And there are models now that are suggesting that.
Yeah, and the best effect that you're going to get is first thing in the morning. So you actually, if you were to do that warm to cool to warm, you'd actually want the cooler light, the more potent light, to be first thing in the morning. So that could be either cooler, it could be brighter, it could be spectrally.
Hang on, you said the more potent light.
Yes, the more biologically potent light.
And again, what does that mean?
So the one that has more of this daytime component in that biological. So I mean, we could get into neuroscience, but there's another photoreceptor in our eye that drives this response. And so it's looking for different wavelengths than our classical visual photoreceptors. So it's looking for specifically a sky blue signal.
Which I would call the 5,000, 6,000 Kelvin area? Or is that wrong to state that?
You know, it's not really about color. You could do things that spectrally optimize to bring a lot of those benefits in 3,500 Kelvin, which is, you know, probably the coolest you'd want in these types of spaces. You don't want, as you said before in your story, you wouldn't want 5,000 Kelvin in your space during the daytime. You want to make sure that you meet that spectral requirement with the criteria of making it pleasant and making it something you want to be in.
There is something about confusion too. There was a symposium up in Canada last year, and a lot of the studies now have broadened out from lighting to saying, okay, traditionally we think the eye is a camera. Well, it's not a camera, because the eye and brain work together, and it's a sensing system that really has a lot to do with your health as well as your vision. And this is always changing under the lighting conditions and the tasks and the environment that you're in. So as important as lighting is, there are so many other things. For example, when older eyes look at a room, if that room is cluttered, it's hard for them to make sense of that room. They need a simpler space. They need fewer things. And that kind of goes against the grain of some people, because they've got pictures and they've got items that they remember, and they've got patterns that they look at. But really, when an older person goes into a space, the simpler it is, the better they understand it and the better they negotiate it. So that has to do with falls and running into things as well. So this is not simple stuff, but we are beginning to understand what we have to do.
So it's fascinating, because my mom was a hoarder, and her house was a nightmare. And now in the assisted living, it's all very simple, and she's doing much better. She's doing much better, but I never really connected that simple life had something to do with it.
Well, one of the things in older eyes is your field of view compresses. So you don't see all of these little visual clues in this 360-degree area that we look around in. You see a much narrower thing, and you concentrate on that and try to make sense of it. Again, the brain is involved here. So that is as important as lighting in many respects, especially in new kinds of spaces where you're just going into them with your older eyes. And so that has to be taken into account.
Robert, other benefits of the spectrum that we should know about?
Yeah, you know, we just talked about, you know, blue and sky blue, and it relates to circadian rhythms. But there are also things in the red end of the spectrum that are important. And I think one that's specific to elderly care is a new term that's kind of coming in healthcare. It's called cyanosis observation index. Ability to see, you know, bluish color.
Wait, say it slow.
Cyanosis observation index. So cyanosis is a condition where you get bluish, like a cyan color in your skin. But that bluish color is actually an absence of red. So, so if you had that, that means that you have some sort of circulatory problem. So it's signs of, you know, pneumonia, signs of COPD, signs of sepsis, signs of some serious things. And it's really detected. If you wanted to detect it, you need a lot of far red wavelengths in order to see that. That's how you know the difference. If you had like a pulse oximeter, it'd be flashing red light, and it's measuring the red light that's coming off of it to determine how much oxygen you have at your fingertips. So these staff that are, you know, in the space will kind of notice that, you know, you look a little different today. And so that is starting to be signs of something pretty serious. And so I think in these environments, making sure that you're getting far red wavelengths as well as those sky blues might be really important to making sure that everyone's keeping good tabs on the health and wellness of the community members.
Terry, you brought some charts that you wanted to share with our audience.
Yeah, well, there are some nice references on this whole subject now, and I'd like to just pop through those. The one, of course, is the IES recommended practice that we talked about. There's also a design guide from NIBS, National Institute of Building Sciences, that is wordy. It's not full of pictures the way we need necessarily in our visual world, but the words are important. And so there's a great collection of information now, so that if you want to really improve lighting for a senior community, or if you're designing lighting for an older person, there are lots of ideas here that you could take advantage of. Things that you might know intuitively, but really now have some science in back of them. Somebody has looked at them. For example, what would you think would be the most difficult place for a senior person to navigate in the home?
I'm going to say the bathroom.
No. It turns out it's the stairs.
Okay.
And it's the first step as you're going down those stairs. This is from a British study. that's the tricky one. If you miss that, you're in real trouble. And so that's where the lighting needs to be. And we're not talking about intensity of lighting here. We're talking about uniformity as well as intensity. You have to be able to see it, but if you make it too non-uniform, if you spotlight that first step, for example, you cannot tell where the edge is with older eyes as well as you can if that was uniformly illuminated. You've got to be able to see those edges as they are physically, not as they are from a lighting standpoint. So that's some of the subtleties that we've really begun to build into these standards. AARP has some standards that have been out for a few years, and there are others that are working on it. There's a very interesting organization too. The name Eunice Noel Wagner is kind of famous in lighting, and I'm sure you used it. She started something called the Center of Design for an Aging Society a few years ago. And she has collected a marvelous array of published material now that really very simply explains basics for older eyes 101, what you need in your home, what you can do in your present home, not in a new place or whatever, but even how to choose a good desk lamp or a good study lamp if you're sewing or playing cards. Those simple things make a lot of difference in the life of people with older eyes, and especially if they have eye diseases.
Okay, interesting. Closing comments, Robert?
I think that we really kind of need to understand what Terry has said. You know, the aging eye has a lot of challenges that need to be overcome with uniformity. But I think from my standpoint, a circadian rhythm is really important because of all these challenges that he's mentioned. You know, it's really important to overemphasize, you know, this brighter day, darker night. And I would probably even say that on that scenario, the darker night's probably a given because the aging eye is so limited. So brighter days is kind of the one thing that you would key in on. And that usually could happen in a very cost-effective way by, you know, in the common spaces. It doesn't have to go in every individual's private room if we're talking about an elderly community. You can kind of go in the more community spaces. So I think there's a good way to kind of do a lot of good with a minimal budget.
Very good. Terry, closing thoughts?
Well, I think one of the things that people always come away from information like this is, what should I do? And I think there are a couple of things. One is very important. If you have older eyes or if you know someone, it's best to let them go through the experience. And what I find now is there are lighting showrooms, lighting retail spaces where lighting is sold that set up scenarios. They set up little scenes so that you can visually find out what kind of lighting is best. Bring along a favorite book or sewing task or something and go in there. Where I'm from, the Cleveland area, we have a sight center. And you can go in there and sit down at a desk or a table. You can try different tablecloth colors. You can try different ways of illuminating the light source. You can walk away with a light bulb that you say really works well for me. It's got a little store in there. But the idea is to experience this. Older people don't need as many words as they need something to look at and say, this is better than that.
Right.
And you know how older people are. You know, they're set in their ways. They've got to see it. They've got to experience it. Well, fortunately, some very, and I'll call them enlightened retailers as well as service organizations like the Sight Center are making that possible. I have gone there for my mother who had eye problems, and amazing things, you know, things you wouldn't think of. Even a little model that she could put in her checkbook so that she could write checks even though she couldn't really see the edges clearly. Simple things like that are very important to people, and they do exist.
Sure. The Sight Center, that's a Cleveland thing, I
Yes.
assume? Very good. Okay, gentlemen, thank you